Good morning, world history. It's Wednesday, March 26th. Sorry to get this out a little bit later to you, but a couple of things that I wanted to go through, actually the rest of the notes really. So this is going to be a longer bit of notes that I speak about and some points to touch on. You will have an assignment to do. It's not going to be due for a few days though. So work on it at your own pace. In fact, next week, we're going to revise the schedule a little bit. So you don't actually need to work on something every day. It'll be more at your pace. And I will send out a schedule of really how that's going to look. In fact, all of the teachers are kind of going to be streamlining it for you. So you can work at your own pace. All right, so we are getting to the end of World War I. The final year of war was 1918, and the United States had entered in 1917. By early 1918, we, the United States, had really ramped up our troops, but Russia has also exited the war. The Allies had suffered great defeats in 1917. It looked like the tide was about to turn, and so American involvement was really, really needed. It gave the Allied forces the boost that it needed. And as I mentioned before, I often think about if Russia hadn't have exited, could the Allies have won? Because in some ways, I think as powerful and as big and such a fighting force that Russia had in the East, I think there were too much of a weight and a strain on the Allies. But that's a fantastic question to ponder and think about. The final German offensive was launched in March of 1918, and that failed. Wouldn't hurt to kind of look up about that final launch. I could talk about it for a while, but and Germany surrenders then. They thought they could make one last push. It didn't work. They had suffered lots of deaths, and so they finally surrender in September of 1918. Now remember, Germany is the first to declare war way back in 1914. Well, I should say Austria-Hungary is the first to declare war, but Germany comes to their aid really quick. This has been a 4-year battle that it's been the bloodiest battle that the earth had ever seen. William II, remember the Kaiser, was forced out. Oftentimes I think about his relationship with Bismarck, and if he had been a better leader and not have forced Bismarck out, I wonder if World War I would have ever unfolded and happened the way it did. Bismarck was a very powerful leader. William thought he was powerful. Maybe he was too powerful, and that's why he took the aggressive measures that he did. Another good question to kind of think about. But William is forced out of being the Kaiser, and Germany becomes a democratic republic. You remember what the word republic means. Government by the people. A democratic republic means people vote for a leader. And they sign an armistice. An armistice is a truce to end fighting. You're willing to give up your arms, lay down your weapons, and end the fighting. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean an end to war, but it does mean they're going to stop fighting. They will not actively pursue their enemy in military engagement. So I want to go through this real quick. This is the origins of Armistice Day. And if you look at the date, November 11th, 1918, this is when the armistice was signed. This is what we know today as Veterans Day. You see that poppy right there? If you ever, and this holds a dear place in my heart, if you are ever around, sometimes in Memorial Day era time frame, oftentimes around Veterans Day, and you see people with a little can probably, or businesses that on their counters have little baskets of poppies, think about taking one and making a donation, because the symbol of the poppy is a really kind of incredible story. This is a poem written by a Canadian doctor who had spent a lot of time in Europe. Canada at that time was a commonwealth of, well, they still are, they were a commonwealth of Britain. And so this Canadian doctor, John McCrae, had just lost one of his best friends in war. And he kind of wrote this poem just as he was burying his friend, and it really hit him hard. Flanders is an area basically in Belgium. Remember, Belgium tried to stay neutral. They got drug into this war. And I just want to read it real quick. In Flanders fields the poppies blow, between the crosses row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the larks, still bravely singing, fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up your quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch, be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow. So part of the legend of the story is that this area was completely destroyed. It was utter destruction. There was nothing left. The fields were shelled, and it was complete wreckage. If you can imagine this area of a war zone. And where his friend was buried, he looked out and there were millions of these bright red poppies growing. Now, this might be folklore, but they said that because of all of the death, it was making a very fertile soil, and these poppies were springing up to grow in the fields of the dead. And this bright red poppy was a symbol of the death, and then maybe the life to come after. So lest we forget. In fact, that's the slogan. Don't forget about the sacrifices that people have made in all wars, but this was the first great war. And because of this, now we call Armistice Day Veterans Day. You can see the Brainerd Daily Dispatch. This is Brainerd, Minnesota, 3:45 p.m. Armistice is signed and Germany surrenders. Washington, November 11th. The idea was that it was at 11:11 at 11 in the morning because of time differences. You see occurred at 5 a.m. Paris time. Hostilities ceased at 11 a.m. President is canceling outstanding draft calls, so conscription was going to end. There was no need to continue it on. So the war is finally over, but now comes the job of figuring out how to make Europe better again, how to rebuild Europe. During this time, there's a communist movement that's really starting to spread in Germany. Now, communism obviously is already spreading throughout Russia with Lenin and Trotsky as the leaders. And because they are so close in proximity, it's spreading into Germany. Remember, communism is a very alluring political ideology because it seems like it is the right thing to do. It is fair, it is equal, and a lot of people in Germany feared communism, and so it was kind of crushed. They wanted nothing to do with communism in Germany. This also brings the end of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Oh my goodness. I can't believe we have finally gotten rid of this family. It took one of their own to be assassinated for this war to start, and then ironically, the end of the war ends this dynasty. This family has been in power for I don't know, 700 years or something like that at this point. This is a powerful family and their dynasty ends. So the Austro-Hungarian Empire is broken up. Independent countries begin, such as Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia. These are all independent nations now. And they have to figure out how to make a lasting peace. So the Paris peace talks begin, and they're going to write a treaty, and it's going to really revolve around the big three. And the big three are the winners of the war. The big three are France, Britain, and the United States. And so the winners of the war get to decide and kind of dictate, well, how are we going to make this right? How are we going to punish the losers and rebuild Europe? So the big three are Woodrow Wilson, David Lloyd George of Britain, and Georges Clemenceau of France. So Wilson, and you can look at this picture over on the right, on the far right with the top hat. They all look like the Monopoly men. But on the far right is Woodrow Wilson, America's president during World War I. And he outlines what's called the 14 points. And it was a peace settlement that he said, well, these 14 things are going to happen in order for a peace to be lasting. And like in the middle here is Georges Clemenceau. He's the French premier, and the prime minister of Britain is David Lloyd George. He's over on the far left. And they're like, oh yeah, okay, we'll agree to this. And actually they didn't. They were kind of making their own little side deal. Well, part of the 14 points was there's not going to be any secret alliances anymore. We're not going to gang up on one country or another. We're not going to make these secret deals. So while Wilson had this big lofty idea, others weren't actually following it the way they said they would. And partly, and you can probably understand this, Britain wanted to make Germany pay. They wanted Germany to pay. They wanted to get back. They were very mad about what Germany had done. They looked at it as this was completely Germany's fault, and we're gonna stick it to them. By golly, we're gonna make them pay. Somebody had to, pay for veterans benefits to widows. They had to rebuild infrastructure. They had to recoup the land. They had to help farmers out in times of aid in order to start growing crops again. Britain wanted to make Germany pay, and it's called reparations. France had while they definitely needed help in monetary wise to rebuild France, they wanted to make sure that Germany was not going to do this again. They wanted to have a secure border to ensure future German attacks. They didn't want this going on again. So each kind of country had their own agenda. Now, obviously, the United States was not touched. We actually probably helped in the war and didn't lose a lot of money the way the other countries did, or need to rebuild the way the other countries did. So Wilson looks at this as like his opportunity to be take the moral high ground, do the right thing. And the other countries are just revengeful. They're angry and mad and want to make Germany pay. So they're going to meet in Paris, and they're called the Paris peace talks. In fact, they're going to meet at Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles is going to get hammered out. However, Germany's not invited to the peace talks. Germany willingly gives up fighting. They sign an armistice and say, okay, we're done, but then they don't invite Germany to be a part of the peace. It's kind of like saying, okay, you wave the white flag and you give up, but you don't get to have a say in what happens from here on out. We're going to make all the decisions for you. So right there, I think that was one of the first problems. I think Germany should have probably been invited to the Treaty of Versailles, to the Paris peace talks, but they weren't. Again, probably because France and Britain are so angry with them. Russia was in the middle of their own civil war, so they did not attend. Remember, they're kind of out of the war. They're in the middle of their own civil war between the communists and the loyalists, the Red Army and the White Army. So they don't come because they're tied up in their own affairs. And so from the Treaty of Versailles, there's some major provisions. First was the League of Nations. Now, the League of Nations, this is Wilson's baby. This is his brainchild. He wanted to create a peacekeeping organization, which makes a lot of sense. Today, you probably know the League of Nations as the UN. But when Wilson writes this in 1918, and then they go to Paris in 1919, it had to give up some concessions. Part of it was that Germany and Russia was excluded. But if you became a member of the League of Nations, you had to do certain things. Wilson, President Wilson, who drafted this document, his own Senate, the United States Senate, would not join the League of Nations. If that is not cruel irony, I don't know what is. This man worked tirelessly. In fact, he died shortly thereafter because he was so stressed over this. He worked and worked and worked on coming up with the Treaty of Versailles and the League of Nations, and the United States government, the Senate, had to approve it, and they would not approve it. That's a slap in the face to our president. He was shocked, and we never did join the League of Nations. So other countries did, but the United States never did. There were going to be some territorial losses, some military restrictions, which is definitely what Britain and France wanted, and war guilt. War guilt was one of the biggest ones. Part of the Treaty of Versailles said that sole responsibility was going to be on Germany. They were forced to accept all responsibility for the war. That's a tough one to swallow. Now remember, they're not there to say, yeah, we'll do that. They're forced to pay the Allies $33 billion in reparations over the next 30 years. $33 billion at that time was an absolutely astronomical number, and Germany was not in a position to pay it. But this is one of the parts of the Treaty of Versailles. Therefore, they didn't have a say in it. This is how it's going to be. So that's the end of the notes right now. If you would please check on Haiku about the assignment. It's not going to be due until Sunday at midnight, so you'll have a couple of days to work on it. I will put all the details in there, but I want you to take on the role of like an ambassador or a diplomat. Maybe you're one of the big three, but think of a representative of a country. Pretend like you're a representative of a country, and essentially think about how the Treaty of Versailles should look. What would you want if you were a representative of Belgium? What would you want if you were a representative of Austria? What would you want if you were a diplomat from France? So take a look at that assignment. It will be due on Sunday. And talk to you later. Goodbye.